Hey students, this is lesson 4.4, using corresponding parts of congruent triangles. We're going to learn how to prove that parts of two triangles are congruent if the two triangles are congruent. Go ahead and do this review and I'll check back with you. All right, go ahead and do the steps in this proof just to kind of review what we've been learning about and to get you prepared for the lesson today. I'll pause here. So this was a proof using the definition of congruent triangles, which states that if all three pairs of angles are congruent and all three pairs of sides are congruent, then the two triangles are congruent. Well, the converse of that is also true. If you know that two triangles are congruent, then you know that every pair of their corresponding parts is also congruent. And we're going to call this corresponding parts of congruent polygons are congruent. I don't want to just limit this to triangles. And notice the red letters there, so we can use those when we do our proof. Corresponding parts of congruent polygons are congruent. So we're going to abbreviate that CP, CEC. Should be easy to remember that way. All right, so here's how that works. In this problem, we want to prove that angle T is congruent to angle S. And the way we're going to do it is, this is our plan. We're going to show that the two triangles are congruent by side. And then once we know that the two triangles are congruent, we're going to use what we just talked about up here, the corresponding parts of congruent polygons are congruent, to show that angle T is congruent to angle S. All right, I'm going to set this up and we'll fill in some reasons. All right, so remember our plan was to show that the two triangles are congruent by side. So we need three sides congruent, so we're going to take this one here, a little bigger. And that is, RS is congruent to UT, that's given. And we also have RT is congruent to US, another side. And that's given. And we have one other side that we can say is congruent, and that's our U is congruent to RU, and that's the reflexive property of congruence. And now we have three sides, so we can say that triangle RTU is congruent to triangle USR, and that's by side postulates. And then our last step is just to say that angle T is congruent to angle S, and that is by our corresponding parts of congruent polygons are congruent. All right, I'll let you try that. All right, one more problem. We're going to prove triangle parts congruent to measure distance. All right, again, what we're going to do is say that figure out how these two triangles are congruent, and then use corresponding parts of congruent polygons are congruent to show that angle T is congruent to angle U. And it looks like we're set up to do side, angle, side, because we have two sides and an included angle. So that's how we're going to prove this one. I decided to do a flow proof here. What I'm going to do is show that we have a side and an included angle and another side, and that makes two congruent triangles, and then we can prove angle T is congruent to angle U by corresponding parts of congruent polygons are congruent. So let's start with our sides. We have RS is congruent to VS, and that's given. Our other side, RT, is congruent to VU. That's also given. Now we're given our angles, angle R and angle B are both right angles, and that's also given. And then these lead to, this one leads to the fact that angle R and angle B, angle R is congruent to angle B, and that's because all right angles are congruent. And then that leads to two congruent triangles by side, angle, side. So I can, here's my side, that goes there, my angle there, and my other side there. And we get triangle RST is congruent to triangle VSU, and that's by side, angle, side postulate. And then with all that, we can now say that angle T is congruent to angle U. Need one more rectangle. And so this leads us to this. And that's because corresponding parts of congruent polygons are congruent. All right, you try that. All right, there's your reasons. Go ahead and do the lesson check, and I'll talk to you about that when we meet in class.